So we have some time left to discuss both these extraordinary talks, and I'm going to begin by trying to make some connections between them. And then very quickly to open it up and maybe to bring to the fore some of the discussions that happened in the breakout groups as well as general questions you will have of our speakers, but also of the day in general, as we wind towards an end and begin to think about what the next steps of this conversation are. We need to end there. Okay. Jesús, I want to start with you, and in a way to try and connect the example of the Renia Sofia and the attempt to, or the relationship with the, how would we translate the Fondation des Communes into English? Would it be the Foundation of the Commons? So the Commons Foundation. So the foundation of the Commons with some of the things that, Lise, you brought up in your extraordinary diagnosis, financial diagnosis of patronage, so and artist labour. So to start with a question, and this comes from a conversation that you and I have had before, was there an attempt at any point to hand over discussions around the budget of Renia Sofia to the Foundation of the Commons? And what happened when, and does that continue, or was that stopped when the new right-wing government? I mean, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the thing was very empirical. I mean, it was supposed to be a process. It was a learning process in which they were moving from typical movement politics, antagonist politics that see the institution as the enemy, to a process in which they would themselves articulate provisionally as an institution, or they would start trying to reconcile their horizontal assembly processes with an institutional form. And so they were displacing them. I mean, there was a process of displacement or of occupying the center to an extent. And then, on the other hand, there was this experiment of having the Department of Public Activities performing this negotiation process. Obviously, budget was at the center, and I think that was the main basis of, and the credibility of the whole process depended on the fact that we could negotiate, or we could organize budget together, creating processes of co-responsibility in which we would do it. The thing is that we did it in a very empirical and in an informal way, so that, for instance, we would negotiate like this the budget, but then I had to translate that negotiation into the highly bureaucratic and hierarchical structure of the museum's economy. So I was creating a fiction, or we were creating a fiction, but well, I mean, the fiction was my position there, because the negotiation was real, and the museum's structure is also very real. But this was not only a way of trying to of solving something that was a contingency, but we actually believed that by performing this, we would be creating protocols. We were creating new ethics that somehow would affect and transform the way the institution works. So it was not just creating an exception, and that, at least that was not our intention, was to do something that somehow would create something new from this negotiation. And so that actually happened. I mean, it happened with the Fundación de los Comunes, and it happened with the Red Conceptualismos del Sur, that we were managing with them the creation of archives, of artist archives in America Latina. But obviously, we were discussing how how much, when. Also, the time is also very important, because we have to negotiate the time of the institution and the time of the collective. That is very different. Urgencies and the rhythm of time and the economies of time are very different. So, but I think we learned a lot. We learned a lot in the process. It's been a really, really fruitful process. The thing is that the situation has polarized a lot in Spain, because there's a growing power of the new left, as you want, that somehow actually the leader of this Podemos party was participating in our conferences in 2008. So it's part of the people we were related to. But at the same time, the right wing and the financial powers are more and more present in the museum. So it's really polarized.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We don't do it. I mean, the negotiation is not possible within the terms of the museum. So we are not negotiating the museum budget with the movements anymore.
Okay, because of the rise of, yeah, okay. So Lise, does this, I mean, you talked in very compelling terms, both practically about a kind of sharing of knowledge, so knowledge about the kind of legal terms of artists or arts institutions, not-for-profit arts institutions, that you then extended politically and philosophically, or political-philosophically, into really a question about, it seemed to me, a question that was challenging the moral high ground of not-for-profit arts institutions, which I think is a very interesting thing for us to talk about or to think about in relationship to what's been said today, and particularly in the context of common practice. But have you also been involved, when you, as W.A.G.E, when you work with a not-for-profit organization, are you able to access the entire budgetary information about institutions? And is that something that's been difficult for you to negotiate?
It wasn't difficult. We did a research partnership with Artist Space in New York, and I actually was working there as the grant writer through that. So that was sort of like being, as was mentioned, being embedded in the organization, and I had full access to the budget as the grant writer, but they did permit me to do an analysis of the payment of artist fees over a 5-year period that I presented it in the breakout group, and I continue to present it. So that was a unique situation. There have been other circumstances. For example, when we released the results of a survey that we did in we gathered data on the payment practices of arts institutions in New York between 2005 and 2010, and when we released the results, which we didn't set out to shame anyone. We really just were gathering data and then reported on what we found, and it turned out that Performa, which I assume everyone is familiar with, ranked worst. And so they reached out to us. They were concerned that they said that we were jeopardizing their funding by releasing this information, and questioned the methodology of the survey. And so we said in an email exchange, well, we'd love to talk, we'd love to meet with you, but the condition of that is that you show us your budget, If it's not true, then just show us that it's not true. And then we didn't hear from them again. So when we make that demand, of course, there's like radio silence often after that. So yeah, I think, but in the process of certifying organizations, Artist Space is the first W.A.G.E certified organization, which stands to reason. But there are 10 more that I'm going to announce like next month, or 9 more. And yeah, they have to show us their budget. That's one of the.
Otherwise, it can't happen.
Right. I mean, some of the information is publicly available anyway, but we require them to open up their budgets. And I definitely, there's a bit of there's some reticence, but I think it's productive. I think it's just sort of it's scary for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, we're having to do this difficult passing of microphones. So Maria, to come to you, I noticed in your talk, I want to come back to some of the questions about opening up institutions that you've both produced different models of, or maybe they're similar models. But to start with, Maria, I just wanted to ask you, you said that the Tensta Konsthall is a private institution. Is there anything that we need to know about the difference between that and, for instance, what Lise is talking about as a not-for-profit?
It's more or less the same. It's just the structure and the governance model that is called a foundation in Sweden. And there are only private foundations. besides that. We're set up in such a way that we're completely self-determined. The board constitutes itself, very peculiar compared to other organizations. We're 50% publicly funded, which doesn't come with any kind of automatism. We apply every year and we report every year to the state, the city, and the region, and that makes up half of our funding, which is about £500,000, and the rest we have to generate ourselves, which in Sweden is a big challenge because as opposed to here, there are basically no private donors. Compared to Germany, there is not one single foundation supporting contemporary art where you could apply for money. So what we do is that we revert to the European Union and collaborations with friends and colleagues across Europe, and to collaborate primarily with educational institutions within Sweden.
And that constitutes the rest of the funding?
More or less.
Okay, thank you.
And also, you know, a stream which is not very big but also not insignificant is that if I come to a place like this, I get paid to talk about Tensta Konsthall. That money goes directly to the Konsthall.
Okay, good. Right, so the reason I was starting with this quite pragmatic information was because one of the things I picked up in some of the breakout sessions I went to was a suggestion, a very strong suggestion, that one of the things that is important for small-scale arts organizations to do is to share information about funding structures, about budget structures, about ways of not simply fundraising, but also sharing and finding ways to equalize budgets, etc., etc. So that's one thing that I thought was important. But the second thing that I also heard in the breakout sessions was discussions about the various ways in which, and the language changes depending on the institution, in which the institution can open up to what Jesús, you talked about as the social or the sociality of the city, of the space. And very precisely, Maria, you talked about with very kind of clear examples of working with the associations around Tensta, around your locale. And I wondered if you saw connections between the two processes, between Maria and Jesús.
Yes, I saw connections, with the difference that primarily in our case, it's to do with people and organizations that are literally next door. So there is a physical proximity. And this is also why it's so special to work in a residential area. And there is a network for art centers in residential, often suburban areas in Europe called Cluster. And it was on my list of different new networks. And we've done precisely what you described. We've tried to visit each other. We got a small grant to do that, to learn about how the budget is constructed, how the decision-making process works, to, on the ground, understand how other people do it, to share this experience, and in the long run, also, I think, build solidarity. And maybe that's a bit more easy if, a bit easier if you're not in the same city. The appearance of competition is maybe later or slower, if at all, because we're in such really different contexts.
We are very unlucky because we cannot have neighbors. I mean, we are too big. Actually, one of my first commitments when I arrived in the Renia Sofia is not to intervene in my neighborhood, because I thought, my neighborhood is where I live. Actually, it's surrounding the Renia Sofia. It's a very intense, very interesting neighborhood with lots of things going on. And but I didn't want to go as an explorer from Renia Sofia to show them how good we are now, because we are too big, and the dynamics of the going on in the neighborhood. I think I wouldn't say that they are fragile, but we wouldn't participate unless they ask us to, and that's basically what we try to do, is to open some spaces for conversation, so that in the case that they wanted to talk to us, because I come from other projects in which the intervention of the institution was damaging the the internal dynamics of movements, in which just by pretending that you are like the others, you're introducing an element that can provoke dynamics that are entropic, and people start fighting with each other. I mean, it was not. It's not easy when you are so big, and I think that it's a pity, because one of the problems when you are in the castle of Renia Sofia is that you miss your neighbors. You miss the warmth of having somebody that is near to you, and somehow it's that you can ask salt or whatever when you need it.
But of course, with neighbors, some of them are really annoying, and they think that you are a nuisance. So it's not only harmony and happiness. But a nice thing which has happened for us is that, particularly since the classroom was installed that I showed you, a number of groups, whether formal or not, have contacted us asking if they can use the space for their own purposes, to have their own meetings, whether it's the language cafe, which has grown out of Ahmet Ögut's project, The Silent University, or a group of elderly people living in Tensta who like to write and who meet regularly to share their writing, or homework assistance organized by the library, but the library doesn't have enough space, so they come to us on Wednesday afternoons, etc., etc. So it's often quite organic, I have to underline. It's hard to engineer. You can facilitate, but not really engineer.
Well, I would like to add that even if we don't have real neighbors in the sense of proximity, we have, I mean, there's a very heterogeneous community of people that actually are having the same demands as you are describing. I mean, people, former students, I mean, we have several projects working, I mean, with the Fundación de los Comunes or others, and are having immediately and constantly demands about space, about logistics, about, I mean, so it's true that we, but unfortunately they are not this kind of neighbors. Our relationship is not based on being close to each other in geographical terms. But obviously, as neighbors, it requires negotiation. I mean, it's good that you said that neighbors also bring problems. And we bring problems to them, and they also
Lisa has a question.
Sorry, I have a provocative question for you guys, which is, I wonder if do you pay fees to groups that use the space or that you work with in your programming? Because this came up with W.A.G.E.'s partnership with Artist Space, because we were an organization. We didn't have our own funding, but we argue that we were providing content and services for their programming, and on that basis they were getting funding. I was writing the grants for that funding, which was sort of odd, because I think this is a situation that's starting to develop in New York, where activism is sort of like the new activists are like the new artists. The argument is that you do activism for the love of it, which is a very familiar argument. So I'm just curious, how do you see that in terms of programming, in terms of budget? I mean, only if you want to answer.
In the case of the Silent University, it has been a certain budget for certain things, not all of it. It depends. We have had different components to the project, and some of them have involved payment. We actually do not necessarily think of these things as part of our programming. It's just things happening in the space, just like the cafe is in the space. Maybe this will change, and we keep on talking about that. Eventually, maybe the different groups will find each other, or we can sometimes stimulate them to discover each other, and things can happen from that. But so far, it's not really part of the so-called public programming.
Well, I mean, ideally, what we've done when things have worked as they should, what we do is to discuss the budget as a whole together. And I mean, as a principle, we try to avoid self-precarization. So there should be some money for the organizer. But how much? I mean, it's true that when you are working in terms of co-responsibility, people tend to be really generous with their time and with their energies and with their knowledge. They prefer to do more and to earn less. But I mean, personally, and my colleague as well, Berta, we try to prevent this from happening, and there's a limit. I mean, but it's a complex issue, because there are some times in which there are levels of autonomy when we negotiate what is going to happen. I mean, when we are involved in the negotiation, and we are investing money, we have this rule. But sometimes it's just that a group demands autonomy, demands that I don't want you to know all the things I'm doing. In this case, if there's a small budget for logistics, okay, I'm afraid that I'm not concerned with their fees. I don't think they never, in these occasions in which they are developing something completely autonomously, are keeping any money for fees. And we are giving them very, very little. It's just for logistics. And
I have a question for you also in terms of wage and how you've gone about deciding upon your strategies, etc. What have you learned from history and from what has gone on in other parts of the world? I'm thinking of the cultural wars in the US. Are there some lessons to be learned there in terms of the position of artists, artist unions and other organizations in Europe?
I think, the primary one that comes to mind is the Art Workers Coalition. And the lesson that we learned from them was to focus on a single issue, which is artist fees, because their demands were so vast. And in the end, I shouldn't say the only achievement, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, because they did incredible work, was just to gain a free day at museums, which is now sponsored by Target in many places. So yeah, so our myopic focus on fees is a lesson from the Art Workers Coalition.
And is there something to be learned from organizations and networks currently working in Europe?
Yeah, definitely. The conditions are so different. That's why I was really curious to hear the response to the text I wrote, whether it has application here. I think it's really important to build, like for WAGE, to build solidarity with group. We do that, but it's also, it's a long way to travel. And I think there's a lot of like in-person networking to be done. Otherwise you're just, it ends up being like, you link to our website, we'll link to your website, and that's kind of as far as it goes. So, yeah.
Just as an example of how different it can be, in Sweden, state institutions have to pay artist fees.
Yeah.
It's very regulated. Yeah. And if you get state money, you're supposed to do it. They don't check if you do it, but you're supposed to do it.
And they also pay you you get like a 2-month contract, right? So that you can be paid as a wage, so that you can receive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
That wouldn't fly in the US.
That wouldn't fly in the US. Okay. On that basis, I'm going to open it up. I want to return after we've all talked and you've had you've given us your views. I want to return to Lisa at the end of this discussion to. I think Lise put some things on the table as proposals, and I think we should return to them at the end of your paper. But to open it up now, so there are what are known as roving mics, and we have Sarah down here who would like to make an intervention. So could we have a mic down here? Sarah's got a yellow scarf on. That's roughly about as much as we can see. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, sorry, Sarah Thelwell, I'm referring.
I have a question and an offer. My question is, how do we do a more compelling job of communicating the desire to represent this holistic value that's being created rather than the just sort of linear notion of value growth, bearing in mind that the body of simplifiers that was talked about this morning will continue to be a highly influential crowd when it comes to the financial support of the publicly funded arts. So that's my kind of return to pragmatism after a morning of ideas. And my offer as...
Sorry, Sarah, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah. So my question is, how do we do a more compelling job of communicating the value we create, because it ain't working yet, or it's not working well enough. Yeah, for all the flaws in those pieces of terminology, etc., etc. Because really what I'm saying is, how do we do two things at once? On the one hand, we need to use the vocabulary we've got for all its flaws, because that's what the body of simplifiers understands, whilst coming up with something more appropriate. So doing those two things in parallel is my personal approach to that stuff. And my offer, sort of in response to the question I'm posing, is to say, would it be useful if we extended some of the kind of data nerd work that appeared in Size Matters to do that with, say, the organisations and people who've participated today, as a means of aggregating data on small organisations? And would it be helpful if we did that internationally? Because we've got some Swedish data. The Danes have been working on some stuff. The Australians are working on it. There's probably stuff in the States. There's all the culture data. So how could we aggregate data to underline these sorts of messages?
Okay, that's an offer. Do we want to take that up? Does that sound useful? Are there people in this room that who are running small-scale organisations that wouldn't want to share their data? No? Okay. Sarah, thank you. I think we take it up. Right. Yes, we'll talk about how. Yeah. Okay, so other thoughts or comments? Justin O'Shaughnessy, up there. Okay. Whereabouts is that person? Okay, I've got you. Next.
Justin O'Shaughnessy. I work for a charity called Shoreditch Trust in Hackney. I'm also on the board of Open School East. I love art, but I want to play devil's advocate a little bit. I think in the breakout there was the one about community. There was a kind of notion that community spaces are disappearing, and actually the conversation here is predicated to a certain degree that we forget that there are a lot of other spaces where all this activity happens. Community centres that are incredibly vital, where groups meet. Elders clubs, school clubs, after school clubs, homework clubs, youth clubs, that are all going on, and I think we need to realise the context within which we're working. They might not be as efficient or as informed sometimes as we are, but they're vital at the same time, I think. And I think it's also interesting when we then look at arts trying to work with communities, how that, in some ways, certainly for larger organisations, it becomes similar to corporations' corporate social responsibility line. We know that it unlocks other tranches of funding, and I think again there's a tension there about how larger organisations taking on community work might remove some of the potential of smaller organisations who've done it historically. I think also we look at that. I think currently we should look outside the arts as well and look at what's happening. I suppose this is the real devil's advocate bit. What happens with an organisation like Common Practice that has come together? If you look at what's happened with local authorities and people like Hammersmith and Fulham and Ealing sharing their back office functions, if you look at what health hospitals and how health trusts and how health is now recommissioned, if you look at schools and the federations that have been created with super heads, if you look at housing associations that move from small communities to large corporations running something like 35,000 properties, I suppose, and on top of this, the power of auditors who tell you to encourage you to be efficient and save costs. So I suppose within the entrepreneurialism, the society that we're in and what you're already doing, it was interesting that Lise talked about the Common Practice franchise, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't heard it termed like that before. But actually within that model, you're already marketized. This group is already marketized. So what's the next step? And do you wait to be told to properly franchise? Do you franchise? Is there a point where there's a driver where Common Practice is forced by the Arts Council to have one executive director and a number of smaller curators beneath them? This is the devil's advocate position. I suppose, the question is, what happens? How do you lead from the front here? Or how do you wait for the Arts Council or central government to come and tell you what to do?
Okay, that's very provocative. So will Common Practice become the brand that has one CEO that runs all the small-scale organisations in the UK. Like a union. Well, okay, let's turn this around, because of course it's very provocative. It's not impossible to imagine. But, okay, let's go back to Lise's alternative vision for unionism that you posited at the end of your... Or is that an alternative vision?
Well, you mean about certifying individuals?
Yes.
Yeah, that's just I just kind of like testing the waters with that. I think it's a really interesting idea. It was not my idea, I should say. It was someone on our board. Yeah, I mean, common practice always seemed to me to be a unionizing mechanism. That's what it seems like. I mean, you're coming together to make the case and to come together to gain leverage, to get more funding. I guess the problem is you're all drawing funding from the same pool, so you're in competition with one another while at the same time trying to create solidarity. I mean, it's the same thing in New York. I think they've got the same problem. I guess I just see a connection between, with what W.A.G.E is doing, trying to bring like hyper definition and clarity and understanding of the exact value of, or trying to put a price on the content and services that artists provide. And if we're doing that in the same dynamic of merit and charity that arts organizations are, that I wonder whether then they may want to or be forced to define their value in exactly the same terms. Like, if you can put a price on anything. I mean, if you want to. I don't know if that's productive. I don't know if it's a good thing, but it's just I feel like there could be a kind of a domino effect from that. I don't know if that's what we want or not.
I have to say that I'm hesitating a little bit in relation to the idea of certifying individuals. To me, it sounds like demanding to see people's party book. And we know what that meant once upon a time in certain places.
But it's based on a self-regulatory mechanism. So an artist would decide that they would not want to show anywhere but a W.A.G.E certified organization. So it would be up to them. There's no,
Yeah, self-regulation can do lots of things to people also.
Yeah,
so
agreed.
I'm a bit hesitant, I have to say. But then just a thought in relation to what Justin said. I think with the bigger arts organizations appearing like corporations and corporate responsibility, etc., one way of thinking about it slightly differently, and in my experience it works quite well, is if you, for example, do not think about outreach. So it's not about reaching a particular group, but you start at the other end. You start with an artist and an artwork and work from there. You can operate very differently. It seems to me that often the mechanization that appears in what you're describing depend on an approach which is much more like an apparatus at play in an automatic way.
Hello. Hi, I'm Sophie Hope from mainly Birkbeck. I just had a practical thing to throw in as well, and a call out really, in response maybe to Sarah's suggestion as well. There's a call out at the moment from the Arts Council for funding, research funding that arts organisations can apply for. I think the deadline is mid-March. And it's a tiresome, repetitive swan song of a situation where they're calling on arts organisations to define the impact of the work they do. So it feels like we're reinventing the wheel. And I wondered if there was anyone in the room thinking about applying, or as angry as I am about the fact that it's there in the first place as a pot of money potentially being misspent, and might be interested in having a conversation about a response, either, collectively. I don't know how we go about that.
Okay, I've got an idea. Brilliant, Sophie. So where are you going to be standing when we're having drinks?
I'm going to be gone because I need to go, but I've got an email address. And
all right.
If you, maybe we can meet next week or something. I don't know.
What's your email address?
Sorry, s.hope@bbk.ac.uk.
Right. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, thank you, Sophie. I'm liking this practical stuff. Yes, a can't see who's that. Is that Anna? Anna Harding.
Anna from Space.
And there's somebody.
I've got another practical one, which I shared with my breakout group, which is that we've thrown all our data on the table and we've tried to visualize it, because I'm very interested in aggregating data, but what are you going to do with it? So I think it's actually, that's my question. What are you going to do with it? We've been working with CSM spatial practices on how you visualize all this stuff without, we just threw everything out. It's like, we don't know what this is or what it could mean, but we've come up with some really, really interesting visuals. So happy to share that.
Great. Anna, where can we see that?
It's going to be published in about a month.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Can we get to it through the Space website?
It'll be print, digital, and yeah, that sort of thing.
But through the Space website?
Space website.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jesus, did you have a response to that? You were looking like you...
The thing is, I mean, in the years previous to the big crisis, there was an attempt by the administration to encourage process of self-cartography. So to delimit the cultural field in a kind of post-institutional environment. And thankfully, then the crisis came and the whole thing didn't proceed. But the whole vision was very scary, in which they would somehow dismantle all the public structure, and then they wanted to locate and identify all the private or non-profit organizations in order to locate the real agents of culture, and that was a systematic process of cartography at that point. Now it's a good matter for researchers to see the world as it was before 2008, but it didn't follow a very let's say productive view, but it was part of the process of dismantling of the public.
Jesus, in your paper you said that you were opposed to such forms of cartography, but I wonder how much that kind of opposition, to be provocative, is related to what Lise said in her paper about the role, firstly, of artists and then the institutions that support them, premising their values, their ethical values, on some form of priceless lack of quantification that then disempowers for a different form of political struggle that needs and has need of quantification. Lise, am I getting that right? A bit.
I think so.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I don't have anything against. I have something against cartography, because cartography is usually done by power and force for reasons. Cartographies are ways to get something. Obviously, it's been appropriated by society and by social movements, and there are very interesting processes of self-cartography with completely different functions. But we have to be aware of the ambivalence of the cartographical process.
But I wonder if another key crux is the culture of assessment and the volume that this is taking now, and how this volume is changing logics. So we are at a point, I think, where the administrative logic in many fields has taken over the professional logic, whether it's education, health, or the arts sector. So assessments and evaluations, etc., they can also involve cartography, self-cartography, cartography by others, and I think they can be useful. But there is something now which has become over the top, which is the volume, which then turns into something else. And how can we work against that? Because it's something that is it's crippling many of us, not least because it eats our time.
I agree with you, but I have to say, just not in response to you, but generally the argument against paying artist fees, it's not an argument, it's just an excuse that there's this sort of allergy to bureaucracy, like don't give us something else, yet another thing to do in another, and I think we tend to hear that, that tends to get used in that way, but I agree with you that there is like a incredible bureaucratization of art production overall that is, yeah.
Yes. I can't see any other hands, thoughts? Yes, right at the back.
Hi, my name is Leslie, and today I am here representing Open School East. Regarding this bureaucracy and culture of assessment and culture of data, I wonder if there's anyone here today representing Arts Council England or other common funding bodies of smaller spaces such as Bloomberg, etc. And if not, were they not invited? Were they invited? Was that a decision? And if they are here, what are their thoughts on this? Because there's been a lot of discussion around them, and it's something we're all sort of constantly negotiating inside and outside these rooms. And my experience in dealing with these funding bodies is that they're administrated by really nice humans that might be here, that are pretty cool people one-on-one. So I was just wondering if any of them are around.
Yeah. Okay, so we do love you if you're here. Is there anybody here? No? Okay. Now, I'm just looking at Emily. Yes? They were all invited. That's why I was just... They were all invited. Absolutely. Okay.
They were all invited.
Just say what...
I'm not sure of the details. They were all in... We did have... a few reservations from Arts Council, but they weren't able to make it on the day. Yeah. We had an apology.
You got a personal apology.
Yeah.
Yeah, to say in defence of those previous colleagues, I used to work at Arts Council, their jobs are becoming increasingly untenable.
Yeah.
As there's fewer and fewer of them and more people outside of the structure.
They're affected by exactly the same bureaucratic mountain that the rest of us are affected by. Yes. Yeah. Right, so Polly said, that's Polly Staple, who's director of Chisenhouse, said this event was sponsored by the Arts Council of England, it was paid for by the Arts Council of England, so it would be, you would have thought it would be important for one of them to be here.
I have to say that in my experience, it's extremely hard to get any of those individuals to come to events like this. It has happened on a few occasions in our case, but we've organized many things which pertain to what they're doing, and we're interested in engaging with them, but they simply do not turn up. And then there was an exception a couple of months ago in Stockholm, where all of a sudden you had this mixing of artists and curators and critics and bureaucrats and all of them, and it's quite sad because it was the Creative Time Summit. So I think we have to do better than that somehow in getting people together.
I don't know if this would work here. This is a suggestion that I have for the way that funding in New York works. One year I was a panelist for the New York State Council on the Arts, for which I had to read about 180 proposals from across the board, from MoMA down to the smallest organizations. And I was really struck by how flawed the process was, because we have to use the same criteria for judgment for all the applications. But of course, the larger institutions are more capable of making applications that garner, 100% maximum funding. So my suggestion to NISCA and DCA, which is the Department of Cultural Affairs, which is the city funding body, and NISCA is the state, is that they stop funding the large organizations and just start funding and put their money towards funding smaller organizations, because of course we know that large organizations have the potential to consolidate power and draw resources towards them. And I think that would be an excellent solution, if I do say so myself. Yeah. I don't know if that would work here, but... I think we're getting into the spot.
Okay, what a pity there isn't a member of the Arts Council here. Right, we're running out of time. Come on, let's hear your views. We're moving into this very good and very practical territory. What's anybody else got to say? What came up in the breakouts? Yes, somebody at the back.
Hi, I'm Sophie and I'm part of Open School East as well. And in lieu of no one else putting their hand up, I'm going to kind of pose a half-formulated kind of question that maybe relates a bit more to the earlier talks that we had. But it kind of came through in, I can't remember who said it, but it was kind of like this permanent infancy that small-scale institutions are viewed at. And Lise touched on it a little bit with this idea of kind of the cultural capital being created in small institutions. And it strikes me that that's very related to the emerging artist, like whatever that term means to anyone who's spoken today. But like emerging artists are stuck in this kind of infant stage until they are blossomed and represented by an established institution, and then they become an established artist. So for me, there seems like this clear correlation between the two of them. And in lieu of an actual question, I was wondering whether you guys could talk about how you see the role of small-scale institutions in relation to the emerging artist.
Sorry, I just have something specifically related to that, which is, I don't know what it's like here, but in New York, increasingly, nonprofits of the same type that we're talking about, who used to serve emerging artists, that was their role, was to provide a platform for emerging artists and to act as feeders into the commercial gallery world. I mean, that was the reality. It's now, from what I've observed, it's the other way around. Artists have their first shows in commercial galleries and establish a reputation that way, so their commercial galleries are bearing the weight of that, of the brunt of that risk. And then they get their first institutional show after that. But at that point, those small to mid-scale organizations are having to function, to up the ante and function as kind of mini Kunsthalles. And so that's putting a lot of pressure on them in terms of resources, because they're having to invest huge amounts of money into capital-intensive projects and infrastructure, gallery infrastructure, which is putting pressure on them to raise more funds increasingly. And then what ends up happening is that if artists already have gallery representation, the gallerist will put money into the production of work for the nonprofit exhibition, which then gets sold. The nonprofit doesn't make anything, and neither does the artist, because they have to usually pay back the investment to the gallerist. And often the gallerist is on the board of the nonprofit.
It's roughly the same in London. And I say London specifically. I mean, I know that different arrangements, but many not-for-profit galleries have a remuneration policy written into the contract with the artist. Not all, as we heard this morning. Jesus, I just wanted to ask you, all this talk about arrangements between commercial and not-for-profit, do they have any resonance in contemporary Spain at the moment with its kind of disastrous economic infrastructure?
Well, not really, because I mean, we didn't have an art market as such, so there was no strong commercial scene. Most of the arts in Spain was supported by the institutions, and probably with not a very sort of solid criterion. I mean, if you were born in a specific city and you were an artist, or if your identity card said that you were from Valencia, you may have very good opportunities to exhibit in Valencia because of the regional policies. So the thing is that there was no real market. So it's now that institutions have disappeared, artists are really in a very, very, very precarious situation, because there's no such a thing as galleries that would somehow take the risk to support emerging artists, and institutions are not doing it either. So it's a really, really complex situation in which artists are actually flying to other countries as other young professionals anyway.
Okay,
Yeah, it's just a small comment about smallness, which is the term that we seem to stick to, but I think maybe we could also consider abandoning, because I feel like we're constantly, I mean, I think what was interesting this afternoon is seeing how, for example, Tensta scale up and call itself a museum, and how Renia Sofia kind of create these other kinds of spaces within a large institution. And so I thought and Lisa almost was talking about how artists are kind of caught in these kind of circuits. But I feel like there's one of the ambitions for today was to sort of shift the discussion from value to values. And that's also why we invited Jesús, even from a big institution, as someone who's working with a set of values which we identify with. And also why we invited W.A.G.E as well, because they're also kind of developing a set of values that we think is important to hear about and to align with. And so I think Kojo brought up this, and which was just repeated, this idea of permanent infancy, which is something I feel like quite often, even actually the process of negotiating the funds for this conference, we had to go through quite a kind of dragon's den situation to negotiate with larger institutions in the VALS network.
Could you say what the VALS network is?
Sorry, the Visual Arts London. It's part of the is the London network of a group of national networks, Contemporary Visual Arts Network. And I thought one of the things that's been, I think, through some of the networks that we're part of, the showroom is part of, such as Common Practice and Cluster and others, that we're developing discourses around this area of the sector which people are taking seriously in many, in academia or amongst our peers and outside of that. So I think it's important I mean, we had an event recently at the showroom where Irit Rogov talked about scaling up, and not in terms of scaling up in growth, in terms of scale of size, but in terms of where you kind of take these arguments and like thinking about who do you address with these, and it's not about necessarily talking up to those above you, but to create other kinds of alignments. So there's not a particular question, but just the kind of comment.
Thank you. Emily, from the showroom. Did you have a...
Yes, just a comment in relation to Tensta Museum and pretending to be a museum, which is more to do with time than space and therefore size. The desire to be more stable and more continuous as opposed to a fragile organization, which is not even an institution, but more a project, which, as we know, has a beginning and an end. So it's maybe more to do with time and how to exist within that time frame than size. I wonder also what the function of distinction can be. I sometimes dream about hearing colleagues elaborate on what they do and why they do it. Directors of other institutions, I'd like to hear them explain, why does this year look the way it does? And why do you choose to work the way you do? Why do you hire the way you do? To have this as a rounded presentation, and then actually to have an argument amongst each other. So why do you do that? I think that's shit. That's great. And to have it in public.
I agree. That's very good.
I think that's something that we share is the small and the big. I mean, I think that they are very relative at this point to see what's big, what's small, in the sense that I think that the institution or the social articulation that survives is the one that shows more capacity to negotiate with others, with many different others. And I have the impression that is something that is equal to I mean, obviously the big ones are more concerned with survival and self-reproduction than with negotiation, because they had never been exposed or they never had to negotiate with except for bigger growing up. So, but I think that's over. I think that I wouldn't say the survival, because I don't think that the survival should be a goal, but it's the success of And the social relevance of an institution has to do with the capacity to not only to care, but to negotiate. I mean, to recognize the other as somebody that you have to deal with, being the artist, being the communities, being your neighbors. I mean, and I think that's something that we can learn from the smaller institutions, because their everyday has to do with the capacity of negotiation. I mean, and I think that's something that would be very, very helpful for us to relate with the small ones.
Okay.
Well,
one last comment,
yeah.
Maria.
No,
We're running out of time.
I'm thinking of two things. One harks back to, I think it was Kojo saying it in the morning about broken contracts, or maybe was it the other speaker? The contract with the film was broken. And I think that it's quite apparent that the contract between the citizenry of at least Europe, and particularly Northwestern Europe, and the field of culture is broken. Yeah. The contract that was set up in the post-war period, that we are happy to pay taxes in order to get a certain kind of cultural life as an end result, that is broken, and we have to re-establish new contracts. And that's why we have to negotiate a lot with all kinds of groups, and we have to gain legitimacy. And there is no way, I think, we can gain this legitimacy unless we're actually a bit more outspoken and brash about what we're doing. And I only think also we can move ahead in that sense if we keep on talking about art. If we actually bring the work itself into the discussion. My feeling is that we've spent the last 10 to 15 years intensively scrutinizing, debating structure and infrastructure for the right reasons, and we should continue doing that. But I think when we continue, we have to do that at the same time as we speak about art and what art does.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I think a lot of people will agree with you in this room. But it also does bring to mind some of the important points that Lise made in her discussion about some of the contradictions of taxation when it comes to not-for-profit organizations that we need to bear in mind and think through as the politics of what we do. Okay? We're now like 1 minute away from being chucked out of this room. Is there anything burningly urgent that anybody else needs to say before I summarize in 3 lines? Yes, Anna? Very quick, burningly urgent.
Think beyond the Arts Council. The GLA are very keen to help. We need a single message for the London people. I don't know who else talks to the GLA, but I'm happy to put a group together. They're very keen to help.
Great, the GLA. So Anna's going to be having a drink. So are you, Anna? Yes. So she's just checking the time. So go to Anna if you want to help with the GLA, a lobby of the GLA. Anything else really important? Yes. Quickly.
Yeah, sorry, I'll be really quick. Richard Perry from the Grundy Art Gallery in Blackpool. It was also just to, I suppose, make the point about the difference between the context of working in London and working outside of London. I don't want to harp on about that because it can get really tedious, I think. But I suppose it was just to say that in my context, our biggest funder is the local authority, and it's a very different kind of conversation having with local authorities than it is having with the Arts Council. Very interested and kind of inspired by what Maria was saying in particular. I find it very hard sometimes to talk about the art. I find that when you talk about the art, often that's when people stop listening, and actually it's talking about the other things that then people start to find a way into understanding why the gallery might be useful in a kind of civic sense, or might have a kind of value in a way that they can kind of respond to. So I suppose it was just to make that point as well.
Well done. Thanks very much for making that point. Important, and I know in the breakout sessions there was a lot of discussion about the difference between the concerns and opportunities in the regional arts galleries as there are in the metropolitan ones. So the irony is that we've ended the day in this situation where maybe the most militant thing we could possibly do would be to talk about art. Okay, which seems to me to be quite interesting. Okay, so let's take that on board. Let's take on board Kojo Eshen's point this morning that I think was very important, that we recognize the hyphenation between small and scale, and we don't necessarily, we can change those and reconfigure those ideas of what's small and what's scale differently from the way that they are categorized by funding councils. We need to recognize that a lot of the language that we're using is, including the word emerging, which was my response to your question earlier. The word emerging, I just think, is a funding category. Huh? There is no such thing as an emerging artist. What on earth is that? It's ridiculous, okay? But we, yeah, or becoming. halfway out of the womb, yeah. Oh, well, that's back to echo. Oh, no, Mark Fisher as a midwife. We can also, those of us that know Mark Fisher will keep that in our heads for a while. Okay, so on a more serious note, separating small from scale, just leaving the funding categories, remembering that we are easily incorporated into a broader political agenda. It's the point that was very forcefully made earlier on in this panel discussion, and also to think about how we can work with forms of solidarity, develop strategies of quantification that are not acquiescent to forms of power, but are on our side in forms of unionization. And finally, I think, to just find mechanisms to work together, possibly, I say provocatively, by opening up the common practice network so that it's not just based in London, but thinking about other ways in which we can negotiate the forms of collectivity that are already in operation across Europe, join them and make sure that the arts organizations that you run are properly valued in terms of their egalitarian and aesthetically useful purposes within a broader contemporary culture. There are drinks outside, and that's what we all want now. I'd like to thank hugely the staff of the theatre and the foyer and Central St. Martin's for putting up with us and allowing us to do everything that we've done today. I'd like to thank Carla Cruz for managing the whole process, which has been brilliant. Thank you, Carla. And I'd like to thank the members of Common Practice for putting this event together. So thank you very much. And let's have a drink.